The next step is, upon the receipt of draft of the SPA, the purchaser solicitor would start preparing the draft of the deed of assignment, also known as DOA. This draft of DOA is to be signed in escrow by both parties, meaning signed by both Mr. and Mrs. Happy and Mr. and Mrs. New. The purchaser solicitor would then forward the approved draft of SPA and DOA to the vendor solicitor. After that, the vendor solicitor would prepare 5 copies of the SPA, where one is stamped as the original and other 4 as copies, and together with the DOA, forward to the purchaser solicitor for the execution by the purchaser. The purchaser solicitor would then start preparing the proper DOA and the CKHT forms upon the receipt of SPA and draft of DOA. They would then inform Mr. and Mrs. New to be present in the office to execute the documents and bring necessary documents and payments. They then later would forward to the vendor solicitor the SPA, DOA, and the 10% deposit in favor of the vendor. After that, the purchaser, Mr. and Mrs. New, are to execute the SPA, DOA, and the CKHT forms in the presence of the purchaser solicitor. They are then to pay the 10% deposit in favor of the vendor and other fees, stamp duty, and any disbursements to the purchaser solicitor. Once the vendor has received the 10% deposit, they would then execute the SPA and DOA in the presence of the vendor solicitor and would also pay the vendor solicitor bill if not yet paid. The vendor solicitor would then forward the dated SPA and the undated DOA with a covering letter to the purchaser solicitor. The purchaser solicitor would then stamp the SPA in the stamp office and retain 1 copy, forward a copy of the stamped SPA to the vendor solicitor, and hand over the original SPA to the purchaser. The purchaser solicitor would also ask the vendor solicitor to send a notice of subsale and write to the developer asking confirmation regarding the undertakings. The final step in the sale and purchase procedure is the purchaser, Mr. and Mrs. New, takes the SPA to their financial bank and make an application for loan to be able to finance the purchase of the property. In conclusion, by following these steps of the sale and purchase procedure, Mr. and Mrs. New will be able to purchase the property.